It's time for the Dynamics podcast, and today we're joined by Microsoft Business Solution MVP and the Director of Product Management at SAGlobal, Joe Leichty. He's going to talk to us about his experience over the last couple of months where he's been using Flow and how that fits into the Dynamics portfolio. We're going to talk to him also about his experience over the last year using Power BI and how that integrates with the product, and he's going to share with us some pretty cool inside tips. And we're also probably going to have a rant by Tommy on the end, so stay tuned for that.
This is the Dynamics Podcast, episode 22, recorded November 7th, 2017. The Power of Flow, with Joel Leichty.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dynamics Podcast. It's November again, as you can see from my upper lip. And joining us today is, of course, the person in the front of the row, always with his hand up, wanting to ask and answer questions. It's Tommy Skaue. Hello, Tommy.
Hi, Fredrik. How are you?
Were you that guy in the front of the row in class, reaching your arm up to answer every question?
It's one of my preferences to sit up front, on the front row. I like that, and take pictures of the slides and the presenters. If the slides are being promised to be sent just after the conference, I move the camera towards the presenter and take a picture of him instead. So that's my thing.
Oh, you're a stalker.
Exactly.
Good. Talking about stalkers. No, that's a bad transition. let's bring in the guest. Hello, Joel. What's up, Joel? You're kind of the first returning guest to the show, so I wouldn't call you a stalker, but you're returning as our first revisiting guest. It's really nice to have you on. Joel is also an MVP, and you are product manager of. What's your position? What do you do?
Yes, I'm a director of product management at SAGlobal.
Yeah,
and MVP, and happy to be back with you guys. Thanks for having me.
So you mailed us a while ago saying that you have been looking into Flow.
Yes,
and we realized finally somebody did it, and we have somebody to.
Somebody had to do it.
Somebody had to do it. So that's probably our main topic today. We are also streaming live on YouTube, and we have some input there. Some people want to have us talking about Power BI as well. So we'll dive into that because that is probably one of your passions when it comes to products, right?
Yes, I manage our BI department as well in the U.S. for SAGlobal, so I'm quite intimate with what needs to happen with Dynamics 365 and the various options available. So a lot of directions we could go there, but let's get into it.
Yeah. And just before we start, we also have to remind everybody that Joel has changed his URL. You have a new site, and also your Twitter handle, which is now Joel Leichty.
Yes. Yeah, my old one referenced AX, and I decided, basically I couldn't come up with a good name, so I just used my own name, because why not?
Why not? That's not going to change, right? Twice.
Yeah, exactly.
So where does that leave me? Because I still got that yet another AX. You saying I need to change that? No.
Well, especially with Microsoft changing the name every 5 minutes, I was like, anything I change it to, I'm just going to be changing it every 6 months. So that sounded like it was going to be painful.
Well, they're probably not going to change it back to AX, but I'm going to remain on the fence a little bit longer.
I wouldn't totally bet it against them just changing it back to AX eventually. Let's just come full circle. So it's joelleichty.com, which if you can spell Leichty, congratulations, but I'm sure Google will autocorrect it for you and you'll get to me.
It's Joel, Joel. It's
yes.
Leichty.
Yes. Lazy Eagle is catching his tan yak. That's how you can remember that. My parents were elementary teachers, so you gotta have an acronym for it.
Oh, yeah, I need to work on mine. What's gonna be?
So let's talk about Flow. Do you want to do kind of a backstory, what it is and how it's changing everything we do in talking about the product right now?
Yeah. So basically, there's now that everything's gone to the cloud, including operations /AX, there's more options for integrating these different systems together. And, if you think about all the cloud services you use on a day-to-day basis from a work perspective, you've got email, Yammer, Teams, Skype for Business, maybe operations if you've made it to the cloud. There's probably a bunch more I could list that, Office groups, SharePoint. You can go on for days, right, on all these possible things that you're using, including things outside the Microsoft world. So, there's other stuff like, I don't know, Gmail and trying to think of what other, DocuSign is another example of something you can use with Flow. So the list is kind of endless in what cloud services are available. So the idea of Flow is to help you tie those things together in a more elegant way, right? So something happens in this cloud service and I want it to happen over here, as a result. One of the simple examples that I've been using is when Microsoft posts an LCS blog, I send it to Yammer, or your podcast. That's even a better example. I have a flow based on your podcast to say, whenever you guys post a podcast, post it to my company Yammer page so that it just automatically goes in there. I don't have to interact with it at all. So that flows from YouTube to Yammer.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the hot topics at the moment is what they call robotic automation or something like that, or robotic process automation, RPA. Sorry. There we go. Which is, I've seen companies go out and trying to sell that to other vendors or customers of us. And it's basically sort of everything that you automate and you do every day, like moving files or looking at something and then responding, or tasks that are basically automated that you do repeatedly. You can use these tools as a gateway to kind of let go of those tasks, just monitoring that, making sure that it happens when it does. I think that this is Microsoft's response to what obviously is something that is getting traction right now, with everything talking about robotics and automation and trying to cut down on lead times and processing and stuff like that. So
yep. Yeah. I think some people have heard of a consumer version of this, which is called If This Then That. If TTT is the name of the app, which is more for like your personal life, right? So doing things like, locking the house and turning down your temperature and turning the lights off at a certain time, and, having those based on different triggers if you want to automate those things. So there's that similar type of automation is happening in the home and in the enterprise space.
So
right.
How would this change the product when it comes to Microsoft Dynamics? What is it integrating, and how would have you tried it out, and have you used it in some way in capacity?
Yes. I mean, there's one huge limitation that people should be aware of. So the most powerful part of Flow is that it can be based on triggers that happen in a system. So like if you look at, say, CRM, you can do these triggers that say when a record gets created or a record gets modified or a record gets deleted. like you used to be able to do with the alerts functionality in AX 2012. So the limitation is right now those triggers are not baked into operations, right? So you can't today use Flow to kind of as a replacement for the alert functionality. You can use Flow to get data into operations. So if something else happens, you know, if I get a certain email and I need to, actually I had a better example. You can do flows that are based on a button. So one of my ideas for an operations flow was like when I go to the airport, push a button, and then based on that button, have it register some expense transactions, like you know, the miles I drove and the tolls, like those kind of recurring things that might happen. You could automate through a flow and insert that business data into operations.
Yeah, the internet detail here is that AX, or the language itself, does not support that asynchronous. So you would need to create that C# proxy bit if you wanted to have like, because you could create an Azure function for that, and then that function could then be exposed to Flow if you wanted to have that connection with Flow.
Yeah, you can create your own connectors, right? So you can basically, if you wanted to automate something that is not connected yet, you can make it happen by using logic apps, right?
Yeah,
Tommy? You're the one who.
Yeah, I mean, all these flows are just based on APIs and OData, like when you're getting data in and out. So. You're talking about programming, but you don't have to do any programming to get into Flow. So,
right. But if you wanted to connect to operations, then you're saying the events are not there right now.
The triggers are not there. So you can push data into operations, and you can read data out of operations using OData. What's missing is the trigger that says the moment I insert a new customer, I want to start the flow. That's one of the most powerful parts of flows is those triggers. They don't have the triggers baked in today. So it's a little bit hamstrung, because some people will say, well, use Flow as a replacement for alerts. Once they have the triggers in place, that would be true. But until that happens,
but you could create an extension for operations where you built that trigger yourself and exposing that proxy yourself through logic apps, if you're a developer or have a developer access. Yeah.
And there's also ways to do scheduled flows. So there are ways to kind of go down that path, but it's, you know, like, okay, every hour check for new records or something like that you could do with a flow. It's just not as elegant as the bottom line. It's kind of working around it instead of using the powerful stuff that's supposed to be baked in.
But you started off with an example of something popping up on the YouTube channel, and then you posted on Yammer, and then Fredrik jumped into, okay, what's the value inside of actually the business application? But perhaps one approach is what you're doing, that you basically using Flow to do things that are outside of operations but still are valuable for your business. But then again, you can use that to learn how Flow is actually working. And then by the time operations actually supports stuff like triggers, you're all already into Flow and you know how it works.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the hardest parts of a tool like Flow is just coming up with the ideas of what you want to automate, right? I mean, like, maybe I'm looking for, you know, periodically I see your YouTube videos come up, but maybe it's not something I'm just looking for all the time. So this is helping me automate a task that I would normally just maybe forget about. Or maybe I would look at it but forget to post it to Yammer. So it's just helping, like, get the consistency there. I think one of the most powerful things about Flow, or a tool like Flow, is where can I utilize work that somebody else is doing, you know, and add value to me. So things like blogs and and video channels are just obvious for consuming in this way.
Should probably have unless there already is a hashtag on Twitter for good ideas for flows.
Yeah, in our company, I started a Yammer group, share what you've done with flow so we can learn from each other, because you're exactly right. I mean, coming up with these things is the hardest part. Like, using the tool itself is, from a demo perspective, it's great. Yeah, I can go in there and do it. But when you actually have to go solve a problem, and think about the problem you have to solve, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to come up with those conditions.
So what is the next step if Flow does not have the feature and the fidelity and what you're trying to do? Where do you go next?
In Flow, you can give them feedback if they're missing something. There's a lot in there. So obviously I talked about operations and the limitations there, but in general, there's more features than hours in the day,
right?
Baked into the tool. So,
well, I've done some cool things. Like I have a weather recurring weather updates, which I use to kind of log the weather locally here to Power BI. And also I've tried to do an JSON parse through this to feed into a record. So I getting a file and then doing a JSON transformation of that to be able to put it into a purchase order or something like that. So it kind of works. It's not easy. You have to know kind of what you're doing, but the tools are there, and it's kind of something for me as a consultant I can actually get into and try and do, instead of having to call up Tommy and making him do like a publication of a logic app into the business.
Right.
But
I think and what you'll find in operations is there's probably cases you'll have to write your own data entities to really make it shine, right? Yeah. Because a lot of times the data entity is dependent on the data that's coming in, not so much the data structure that's in operation. So,
I that all the data entities are just containing too much information, more information that you need, and they are somewhat bloated in information.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe there's required fields that you don't know in the flow, and right. You have to come up with a way to automate those. I think one key thing though is you guys mentioned logic apps, and I wanted to make a distinction between flow and logic apps, because in the background those two things are identical. Those two things are built on the same technology. Let's just say that, right? So the key difference is Flow is a super user tool, whereas logic apps is an enterprise integration tool. So a lot of times when people are bringing examples to the table, they conflate that. They're like, well, I'll just use Flow for my enterprise integrations. No. That's not the right place. I mean, you get into that, and the person who created the Flow, I mean, everything is authenticated at a person level. So now what happens when they leave the company? You don't necessarily have a way to manage that enterprise integration if somebody leaves. Yeah. There's also scaling issues where, depending on your licensing, you only get so many, flow actions to happen. So it's just two different. It's the same technology. If you go into the UI for both, they'll look very similar. What you can do more programming on the logic app side. So there's more you can do on logic apps. But the fundamentals are the same. The technology that Microsoft is using is basically the same. Like, basically Flow is built on top of logic apps.
Right. Yeah, and so Flow is more for discardable end user solutions that they can, like their own little small solutions. We've touched into Power Apps previously in previous podcasts, and it's also the sort of things that you can discard. You can prototype something quickly, and if it's a good solution, then perhaps you can build something more on it. I haven't even thought about that. There's limitations on the execution of the flows, but you're right. That's a valid point.
Yeah, there's all kinds. It's typical Microsoft licensing where there's all different levels depending on, your subscription level to Microsoft. But but yeah, Logic apps can scale to whatever because you just pay per transaction.
So thinking about Flow, so how does that tie up into Power BI? What are the relations there? What can you utilize with Flow compared to Power BI, and is there a gap?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty different tools because Flow is to automate a task and obviously Power BI is to report on some data. There's a couple of things that you can use Flow for, a couple of alert conditions related to Power BI, but they really don't cross over all that much. I mean, the one that people cross over is Flow and Power Apps is a lot of times kind of combined into one sentence, so to speak. Or when I went to AXUG this year in the US, there was a lot of topics about how to use Flow and Power Apps and CDS, right?
Right.
And I think Microsoft a lot of times positions it the same way. Well, yes, all those things can work together, but that doesn't necessarily mean they should work together, right? I think it's kind of confusing the tools more than helping explain any one of the tools. So what I mean is so Flow is for, automating the flow of data, right? From one thing to another, which you may need to have happen as part of a Power App. But a Power App, depending on what level you may also want to use a Logic app, right? If it's an enterprise style integration that that you're building, or an enterprise tool that you're building, you don't want to build it on top of Flow. That doesn't make sense because that's not the right type of integration.
Yeah, but you have so again back to that super user possibility that you now have, which empowers your organization. Oh my God, I'm quoting the Microsoft the mission statement.
He's like you're reading from the brochure.
Yes, empowering every person and organization in the world to achieve more, right? So, but
who here likes digital transformation?
Woo-woo. But there's the Power BI. There you have these data-driven alerts, right? So you can add if some value exceeds some type of, so you can have calculations and you can have KPIs and you can do that. So if you have a report card with KPIs, if it goes below something or above a certain value, like somebody reaches their goals, so you can have like the email publishing to everybody in the organization saying, congratulations, this person has reached their goals this month. And if somebody has a birthday or something like that happens, you can actually use these tools together and automate tasks that you normally do. So and I think that's the outtake or the extraction of Power BI, and the input would probably be to feed some type of data source or live stream in Power BI. But again, in Power BI you can also add Power Apps, and so you can add a Power App into a Power BI report, and based on that do a flow. So there's I'm thinking these three Power it kind of irritates me that it's not named Power Flow, because that would kind of make it more fit into this Power trio. But yeah, so I think everything is you can use them very interactively, like the one can feed on the other and basically loop back. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think some of what Flow gives you the ability is to, you mentioned, a common scenario for many tools is when something happens, send everyone an email, and then we all get 6,000 emails a day, But with something like Flow, I can also just say, well, when something happens, go insert it into a spreadsheet, or go insert it into a SharePoint list.
Or Yammer.
Yes, or Yammer or Teams, or, I don't have to get everything via email. I don't just have one way to sort of subscribe to this data.
Yep.
I've got 100 different ways to subscribe to the data. So, you know, I'm always a big proponent of getting things out of email because, you know, we're all just overloaded trying to manage that on a daily basis. And, you know, you don't always need that stuff.
Yeah. No, it's better to put it into like social engagement apps and those types of things instead of pushing it through email. I totally agree. Right.
And then Common Data Service also gets kind of mashed in with all this. So Common Data Service is available to be used with Flow. You can read records out of Common Data Services. They have the triggers. So when a record gets inserted, I can do something else. But Common Data Service gets conflated with Power Apps, which I think is unfortunate because Power Apps is really just whatever data source you want to point at it, right? You can point anything with OData, you can point a Power App at it. So you could point a data entity from operations at a Power App. You don't need, you don't have to have Common Data Service in the mix, right? That's just if you kind of need an ad hoc database that you don't have the database structure anywhere else, you know, then there's this option for an additional quick and dirty database that you can sort of spin up.
And I think they want to, if you're using the integration tools between CRM and sales or customer engagement and these integration points, I think they want you to use that source instead of going directly to the apps themselves and extracting it. It would make more sense though, right? To have a common data source where you add on apps, so you have the star schema instead of adding something on the outside to one of the apps.
Yeah, maybe you start off with something that pulls off either operations or customer engagement, and then at some point in time you move those data blocks to Common Data Services and pull it from there instead.
I mean, I struggle with that because there's a lot of cases where I would say, why not just have a logic app that pulls data out of CRM and pushes it into operations? Why do I need an extra thing in the middle of that?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting how they're doing it. They're basically using a concept that they're going to produce more integrations with. So they're trying to standardize the integrator so that you can do basically, if you don't want to attach it to operations, you can attach it to SAP. Or if you have Salesforce, you can attach it to Salesforce and operations. Or even if you want to do an EDI, you can actually, and we demo that in our latest episode. We show that you can actually, that we talked about on not the latest episode, but the one we did on Common Data Service, where you can actually use Power Query to go and extract data from a data source, pull that into Common Data Service as a feed, and then pull that into your operations database.
Right. Yeah, and like Dennis is putting on the chat, look at the Dynamics 365 for Talent. Talent is capable of putting data back in the CDS, so you can pull that out for your logic apps or Flow or Power Apps or whatever have you. But I think maybe one of the points there are operations and customer engagements and CDS. All of these support some OData APIs, so you can pull data from them. So yeah.
Yeah, what I heard was that they're going to build the future apps on Common Data Service. Like we've tried to get the team behind the product graph, but they haven't been introduced to the podcast quite recently. I think they don't have a product yet, but they've talked about it. I guess it's not just for show. I would bet they're putting a lot of effort into it. I'm not sure what the status is at the moment, that they showed it at AXUG. No, they showed it at a technical conference. And I think it's important that we understand how the Common Data Service is going to be integrated as to the new Dynamics product in the future. It's going to be pretty at the core of everything.
Yeah, when you take it to a higher level, it makes sense because there's things in your business like, let's say, items or projects or workers that you need in a bunch of different places. So those kind of things totally make sense that you need some kind of common repository to store those things and have the data flowing in and out in a logical way.
Yeah, as Dennis said in the chat, right? It's talent is built on the common data service. So every entity, every data, is it?
No. There's some of the apps are. I believe that it actually uses operations technology for most of the database storage. And then there's some add-on apps with talent that I believe do use common data service, like some of the recruitment ads. Any app, because you can't change the database schemas for CDS. So there's add-on things that they're building on Power Apps and CDS. I believe. I'm not.
And CDS also has this extensibility story, and not CDS. Talent has this extensibility story, and CDS works in a different. But I think you're right. Whatever data is put in CDS is for those additional apps. But I think it's fair to say that all of this. But the main systems we're talking about so far is operations and customer engagement, or Dynamics CE for Compact Edition. Sorry, I had to throw that out there. but those are definitely very, very different systems, and so there's still a long road to go for these two systems to talk together in better than they do today. I was just going through that prospect to cash experience through CDS, and I think it's fair to say that operations is better at handling some parts of the data than CRM, like for instance the just setting the price and handling tax and things with inventory and stuff like that. You could probably sort of solve that with CRM or CE, but it's better handled in operations as far as I know. But then again, these systems need to talk to each other, and one of the things I've heard is that with CRM, the salespeople they have a lower threshold for adding duplicate data or incomplete data in CRM, as far as I've been told. And then again, perhaps operations is more strict on this, checking your data and having your consistent data. So how do you integrate those systems? Well, you have to have all sorts of logic and checks and validations in the midst of this. So this will be the things that needs to be mature more with CDS in the months to come, I guess.
Yeah, but it's early days, right? We're not there yet. It's a story that we're working on, and Flow was pretty infantile when we first talked about it on the show. Like in the last year, it's come a long way. So because is there an approval functionality in it right now?
Yeah, I'm actually using that because one of the things I'm consuming is the LCS blog. But I find the LCS blogs to be hit or miss on whether they're relevant. So I actually added an email approval in the middle. So I have to approve it. And if I approve it, it goes to Yammer. If I reject it, it just goes into the trash. But I'm actually built my own workflow based on, do I want this blog to be shared with my company?
Okay, this is a cutscene minute. Is this something you can wing on the podcast?
Yeah, I can show it. So let me go over a few. You can see I have a bunch in here that are turned off because I try things but I don't always use everything on a regular basis. But let's start with the most important one, right? How to get the Dynamics podcast automatically consumed in a flow.
I think everybody should add this to. You can share this, and Joel will send this to you so you can activate this.
So when you come into Flow, I mean, there's a couple ways to, you can either create a flow from basically brand new, or there's a bunch of templates in here. And I think for this one, I stole a template, at least for the YouTube part of it. I'm not sure if they had a specific YouTube Yammer template. So the template is helpful to just basically create these boxes on your behalf, create these steps. But generally, the first step you have is some kind of trigger, which can be like a record is inserted to a table, or you can have triggers based on flow buttons on your mobile device, or you can have triggers that are schedule based. So every Friday at 5 p.m., email me a reminder to go to the bar, that kind of.
That's important.
So yes. We all need that reminder because we won't remember after a long week. So one of the flow triggers is a YouTube trigger that says when a video is uploaded by a channel, and you have to put in the channel ID. And then I created a new step, which is a Yammer post message step. I put it in our SAGlobal. We have a D365 group. So I put it in there.
Okay.
And that was it. So when this gets posted, it should go up there. This channel ID obviously is a little bit goofy, but if you Google the Dynamics podcast, it's basically in the URL. It specifies this channel ID.
Okay.
Could you use our alias as well? The DIN podcast.
Yeah, that's.
D-Wayne
I
podcast
don't.
Is our alias.
I don't think so. I think you have to have. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but I believe you have to have this weird string.
All right.
Okay, cool.
And this was a preview, so that's that kind of stuff that you mentioned. Maybe they'll add over time, like where you can put in the, a friendly name or something.
So can you save those? So those values are basically tied to the flow. You can't reuse them across the flows. There's no like scope outside the flow. No, I'm just asking.
Which values?
Well, any value you put in here for input for your flows. No, probably not.
You can export the flow as like an XML file. So
okay.
You can see there's actually a package export, which just lets somebody else re-import it, kind of where you left off. And then obviously there's this Logic Apps template where you can take a flow and turn it into a Logic App, again, because they're built on the same technology. So
okay.
I can build the same thing.
Can you do that? So one of the issues with this is, of course, running this as a business critical application. There's no like test environments and staging and those types of scenarios. So would you then do, say you made something and you can export that to a developer and say, here, make this a Logic app and because this is so critical, right?
I mean, if it's business critical, it should be in Logic Apps so that then you can specify the environments that, and how things are going together. Obviously, posting the Dynamics podcast to Yammer, I mean, it's pretty business critical, but if I don't get it 1 week, then, we're going to still run the business. So yeah, that's where I think Flow is not the tool for business critical, because I'm just not monitoring these things in general in the same way that I would monitor a Logic app.
Right.
So there's no centralized telemetry, statistics, or anything like that across users on the same tenant, for example. No, I'm asking difficult questions.
I haven't got into the admin console, so I don't know. It does have a nice run history, so you can see what's happened, and if there's errors, you can kind of drill into what happened. So from this perspective, I think it's pretty good. It does take, it's kind of hard with things like YouTube, because generally it takes a couple tries to get it perfected. The first time you do it, the text all runs together in Yammer, and you got to go back and fix the spacing in your flow and that kind of stuff. So it is a little bit of a trial and error process. Right.
Yeah, because I noticed that you have a lot of error between the lines. And I was actually thinking of asking, was the video embedded in I assume it is embedded in Yammer, so you can watch it inside of Yammer?
Correct. The link to the video. I don't think it's like a direct, fancy video link, but it just has a URL to jump over to the video.
Yeah, because there is a post processing on the post itself in Yammer. So if you post a URL to a direct video, it will actually repurpose it and show the only video, right?
Yes, I found some of those, especially the preview flows. Like specifically when I tried to post something to Microsoft Teams, it kept blowing up all my URLs. So there's some case, again, it's just, that's where it gets into a little bit of trial and error, and sometimes it's Microsoft needs to fix their logic.
Doesn't like query strings with a lot of values, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, Teams is just resolving everything to text when it should be, kind of saving it as a URL.
Okay.
So then this flow I just stole from Microsoft. It was just a basic template flow. You can go to templates and get the weather forecast. And if you're an American like me stuck in the 19th century, you can do it in Fahrenheit. But this just sends a mobile alert. And mobile is kind of a cool thing that Flow enables, whether it's, with Dynamics or any of your business applications, that you can install Flow on your mobile device and then send a push alert to your mobile device.
So will this replace the could it help with the alerts? It definitely could, right?
It could help. I can show you that in a second, but the answer is not yet. Not till they fix the triggers. You need the triggers to really do an effective alert. Because like the trigger on the YouTube podcast is you're posting a new podcast and then it shows up. So there needs to be a trigger on the operations where it says when a new record is created. But I'll create one for blank in a second and show you kind of the difference between operations and CRM.
All right.
But the last one you asked me about was this LCS blog, where it sends an email to myself. So in this case, I put a third step between Yammer and an RSS blog feed, which is it's supposed to send me this thing. There's a special flow step called an approval email. Okay, so I get the approval email. The approval options are to approve or reject. And then if the condition is approved, then it goes and posts the message to Yammer. So this is allowing me to essentially I can create my own workflows via email using Flow.
Right. And the email just has the links to either approve or reject.
It's exactly. It basically has the same thing that's in the post message, like, what's the summary from the RSS feed. So I'm just getting that same summary with the link to the LCS blog. I think I have that open to what that looks like. Yeah. So.
Okay, that's cool.
This is an example of something I should probably fix the text on, but it's not terribly important. I just click the link, read the blog, and decide if it's worthwhile to share.
Right. Yeah.
So this helps me because I want to keep in touch with what's happening on LCS, so it helps me anyways. But then, some of those LCS blogs are pretty important when, from month to month, they may be releasing a bunch of stuff, or this one I rejected because it was not terribly interesting.
Right. So talk about the sharing options now because it seems like you have a long list of flows. How would you go about to share that with either others in your organization or outside of your organization?
Sure. So there's kind of two ways to do it. There's, I guess, sharing the flow itself is pretty simple because you just hit export, you export it to a zip file, and then you're just sharing the file however you share files in your organization. What we do is we started a Yammer group of people who are interested in Flow, and then we're just posting the zip files over there. So if somebody else wants to use it, they can download that file, and then there's a import button on this home screen.
Okay.
There's kind of another level of sharing where you can actually add multiple owners to a flow. So you can have if I'm posting something to Yammer, I can have maybe my IT staff help me monitor that flow in case something goes wrong.
Could you make that a system account?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah, it could
basically,
be any
it's just
account,
any
right?
AD account. Yep.
that kind of
Well,
circumvents
and
that person quitting issue, right? So if they have an something that want to put into production,
Kind of. I mean, like so going back to my Yammer example, I'm logged in as me into Yammer. So it's posting as me. So if I get run over by the ice cream truck, then, my account gets deactivated. The flows aren't going to work anymore. So you could take that flow and you can sort of log out of the existing person. Let me show you where that is. So yeah, this connections tab. This is logging in as me. It says I'm logged in as me to YouTube, but that's not really true. YouTube is public, so there's no login there.
Are those like tokens that expire, or how does that work?
It's just typical AD.
they do.
I don't know what you call them. Tokens. Do they?
Yeah, I have to log in every now and then. It kind of says.
Okay.
Yeah. It might be
I
because
think
we're demo environments and Tommy keeps shutting them down on us. But,
No, but typically they don't store your login. They either store some token that you've been given that grants the necessary permissions, and those tokens are typically have an expiration date. So that I would expect them to expire at some point in time.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I haven't been logged in long enough to get kicked out of this. So
Right. Yeah.
I'll have to see when I go through a password change. I thought the way this AD stuff worked, though, that it didn't expire, that when you did one of these connections that it just kind of stayed active, but I have no idea.
Well, I think you can create tokens that are perpetual. I wonder if you can make those on like application tokens, but I'm not sure like these user tokens or these user connections, if you like. But that definitely something that we can Google. I'm just asking.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's your options to create a new one. I'm not just going to hit create from blank, but you can do create from template, which is a whole list of Microsoft templates that they provide, or you can import from a zip file. I just want to do create from blank to show what's available with operations and dynamics in general. So I'm going to say, give me everything and Dynamics 365. So what you'll see here is, Dynamics 365, that's CRM, and there's 13 triggers for CRM.
When did they kind of catch that prize of we are Dynamics 365, you other apps are kind of inferior to our
Early
importance. Let us just take the name to ourselves. Let's make it easy.
I'm guessing somebody got promoted and it wasn't from the operations group.
Oh, there we go.
So then there's Dynamics 365 for financials, and you'll see here a link for Dynamics 365 for operations, right? So, but you can see the CRM, right? This technology has, when a record is created, looks like they've got a new version of when a record is created. Deleted, selected is interesting. I don't know how that works, but you get the idea. Deleted, updated, created, normal stuff. And we've even got it for financials, right? So they must have built it into the nav technology. Here it looks more specific though, right? So they have some that are specific to specific entities and then other generic ones. What you don't see in here is any triggers for operations. So when you click on operations, you see the triggers 0. You only have actions. So I can do these actions, right? I can create a record, or I can get a list of records, or I can update a record, but I can't do something because a record got updated.
Can we just now, if anyone from Microsoft is listening to this, because we don't want to put all of these into a separate IDs that someone can vote on. we want all of these. We want at least the same ones as financials. So I expect triggers in operations for all of these within 6 months. Yes, please. Because that's the next step. Which triggers do we want to have? And like you showed us now that the result was blank, and then you could use user voice to add suggestions. And I've seen the same thing on logic apps. When I pick a connection and there's nothing there, and the only thing I got to do next is create a vote or find some stuff that other people want to have put in there, and I can vote it up.
Do you have to stage it through Common Data Service to get it working?
No. I mean, even then it doesn't really work. The only thing you can do is basically get a list of records, get a record, or you can get many records. Get records, there it is.
Oh.
So you can use Flow, or Logic apps by saying, well, give me all the records in the last 24 hours, right? And then I'm going to go process them. But it's not as fun as the triggers, right? I mean, the triggers are, oh, somebody just set up a project. I need to go review it because I'm the project accountant. You know, I want an email right away. I mean, you don't want to wait. And this get record stuff, you can only run so many times. You know, you can't run get records every 5 seconds because you'll run out of it. You'll run out of flow events from a licensing perspective.
And back to what I said about asynchronous coding. So with CRM or customer engagements, it's C#. So they have functionality in their language that is asynchronous, that supports it natively. And as far as I know, but I could be wrong on this, X++ does not have it. And that's why you need to create a proxy for those triggers for operations. So you'll have to create that in C# and then plug that in with X++ in order to get those triggers exposed for this.
Could you do it on a database level? Because you could basically add web apps to these CRUD functionalities on the database level. I'm not sure if they can do it in the back end, so they're just exposing it instead of running through the code, explicitly exposing this to the flow trigger. You can do it on the database. So in Cosmos DB, you can do that. You can add functionality into the CRUD functionality on the database level. So if a record is updated in some type of table that you're subscribing to, you could basically just add a flow trigger to that functionality, and the flow can pick up on that.
What I'm curious about is if there's performance concerns, like, is it, you know, if you have a table with millions of records being added every day or something, can you really support triggers
add it to the
for a table like that?
Add it to the secondary database.
Sure. I'm just
or the tertiary.
Curious if that's part of the problem with operations that maybe some of these other systems don't have to deal with, is just the volume. But I don't know. I don't know from a technical perspective.
But is it based on the entity store? That the records that you get records is based on the entity store and not on the database, right? So it's related to, it's actually using the entity store to do this. And that's not very...
Yeah, I think you mean data entities, not entity store, but yes, it's based on data entities. Because it's based on OData.
Right. And one thing I noticed that when I was playing with this is that the customer entity had so many properties that the browser basically, or even the UI in Azure was, when I was playing with this, just almost choked. It couldn't handle all of the data, the data coming through, and memory consumption and performance. So I hope they do stuff. Either they're going to do stuff that improves the performance of when you're working with this, but what you're referring to is basically the amount of data coming through. But
I'm just curious. I mean, I know when you get into, I don't know, deleting or adding huge number of records, it gets more expensive to track. Somehow you have to be tracking all these events and sending it to the service.
Yeah,
that something happened. So almost like database logging. And as we all know, if you just go turn on database logging for every table in operations, you're not going to have a good time. So
yeah,
I don't know that. I'm just curious if that's part of the problem with the triggers.
Well, there are limitations with OData as far as I know.
Oh, yeah.
Now on entities, funny thing, I've just recently heard that they have something similar with the customer engagement CRM. They don't call it data entities; they call it virtual entities, and they are similar to data entities because you can access them as an OData source, but they are only read-only, and they're working on making them read-writable, like the data entities are for operations.
They're working on that for which platform?
For CRM, they call it virtual entities, and it's the equivalent, as far as I know, it's the equivalent of data entities for operations, but only read-only in compact edition.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, that's a cool demo. But you said, Flow is built on top of Logic apps,
right?
And underneath of Logic apps, we have basically something that is hosted in Azure. It's scalable, and we don't have to put up any servers, but we can do something with you can configure the scaling, right? Either we pay more and we get dedicated resources, or more resources for at least maybe not for Flow, but for Logic apps. Where do you see the limitations for your flows, basically? I mean, you said you had the limitations of how many flows you can run. Do you see that in your UI here somewhere?
Where do you see that? No, I think I Googled it or something. If you Google Flow,
limitations.
So, yeah, exactly. Good idea.
It's called a tampon. No, let's...
I think it was like 3,000 events on our subscription, but of course, there's all kinds of different things between partner subscriptions and regular subscriptions, and
right,
it's somewhere in the hundreds to thousands of events that you can have. And then, like, every one of these, when you look at the run history, basically every one of these is an event. So I'm not even close to running into any of those limits yet.
But how do you know? How can you know that?
Because I'm only running 3. I'm basically have like 2 events a day. So
I think there's an Azure subscription that you can, because you can have sort of like 20,000 hits or flows running, or you can have. I don't think there's an unlimited plan, but I think there is a plan for how many you can run. Yeah, for each. So it's in the Azure subscription somewhere.
Okay.
It does look like there's an admin console that might.
Oh, look, details and resources, etc. Now I noticed when you went through the menu, you had what's called gateways, which is what we've seen that with Power BI, and maybe we should talk a little bit about Power BI, but. Gateways, can you use Flow to connect data on-prem? I'm asking a question here.
I have no idea. But when I click on gateways, it takes me to Power Apps, in case you're...
okay.
You can build custom connectors. I have no idea how, but...
I haven't seen a demo.
There you go.
But yeah, I've
create
heard
a
that
custom connector as long as it's based on a REST API.
It's pretty well documented. If you have a REST API, they just show you in a couple of minutes in your published, if you have all the backend set up, I guess. But yeah.
And I think that's how some of the places like DocuSign are doing their flows, right? Like they're creating their own REST API to their service. Microsoft is doing some of these, but I think third parties, Slack is in here, and it's not just Microsoft technology that's in here. There's all kinds of of web companies that are baked into Flow. I think the ones that are baked in, maybe they wrote their own, but somehow they work with Microsoft, so it's just on the site. But there's a Flow option where you basically put in, I think, the URL to your custom REST API, and then you can kick it off from there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, should we jump onto a different topic? Power BI for operations and what's in there?
Yeah, I don't think I could do a live demo of Power BI for operations, but we can definitely talk about in there. So lay it on me. What's your questions?
There was this fairly nice blog post by was it Espen, where he had he had a nice overview of all the what options do you have when you're thinking about Power BI for operations, because I think a lot of people get lost in all of the various options and the sources, and so that the data sources you can use and how you can use Power BI either with the license or the built-in license, either as just inside of operations or outside of operations. What can you bring into, for instance, into Teams, and what can you not bring into Teams, etc. There's all sorts of things going on there. So,
right.
What are your comments, Joel?
So, I mean, there's kind of this baked in, I don't know if you've seen in 7.2, maybe I could show it, but there's baked in embedded Power BI, they call it. Just basically all managed by Microsoft, right? So they have this thing called the entity store where you export data kind of behind the scenes. You don't really see it. You don't have access to the database. You're just running some function and the data is showing up in this database. And then you can do this embedded experience. That's kind of one option. That's what Microsoft is providing. I have concerns there about how big of a data model you can have before that really blows up. And a lot of the reporting we focus on is the project module. If you've ever worked in the project module in operations, the data model is
fragmented is the word.
Thank you. Thank you for finding a nice word.
The professional term is standardized, right?
Yeah. I mean, even inventory reporting, right? I mean, that data model can get kind of crazy.
If you have a financial element to it, it's
exactly.
Yeah.
So those, or even ledger transactions, if you're trying to report down to the very detailed transaction, I don't know that embedded is going to scale for all of those scenarios as it is today.
But okay, so you referred to the entity store. And just to clarify for anyone listening, so you would have the entity store both on these single box, sandbox, tier 1, dev test boxes, but it would be in the form of a database on your SQL 2016, hosted on the same VM. And for any tier 2 type of multi-server, similar to production environments, it will be Azure SQL. Database. So what I think some people might struggle with is okay, how do you do this? You create your reports, your Power BI reports on your single box, and the data source is now SQL 2016. What do you do when you move this then up to your tier 2 type of either UAT or production environment?
Right. So Microsoft so it's actually more work on the tier 1 boxes, because on the tier 1, you actually have to repoint some setting to say, hey, here's where my entity store is located. Especially if, it gets complicated, especially if it's like a tier 1 Azure hosted box, you have to deploy your own database on Azure to do the whole entity store thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take this all back. On any tier 1, you have to deploy your own database right now. You can't just do it if you want to actually view the embedded experience inside the application. It needs to be hosted on Azure because the embedded piece of it actually needs to talk to Azure. It doesn't know anything about your local database.
Okay, so those are the Power BI embedded reports that you cannot bring outside of your operations experience.
Correct. Yeah,
right.
It's just operations data, and it's just based on the entity store experience.
Right. Well, that is interesting, and then you have the Power BI reports that you can host on Power BI. You can bring them over to Teams. You can view them directly in Power BI. Those, I assume, you can pull out data through the data connector you potentially install, or the gateway you install on the VM itself, the Tier 1 VM itself.
Yeah, well,
but you wouldn't do that.
So yeah. If you're gonna forget about the gateway, I mean, yes, you can get in a production scenario. These gateways and these deployments don't matter. It matters to developers, but it doesn't matter for how you're consuming these things.
Yep.
What I will say is from a deployment perspective, if you want to go on PowerBI.com, you really need to then get into there's this thing called bring your own database. And that uses technology where you can like incrementally load an Azure database from a data entity.
Okay.
And that technology would also allow you to build a cube, a tabular cube on top of that data model. Unlike the entity store, is just what's called direct query. So we found some issues with direct query. Depending on how complicated your calculations are in direct query, it's not terribly fast, right? Versus basically some of this is pushing us back to the old cube technology. So anyways, you get the data out of the system into essentially a data warehouse. And now you've got access to the data. You've got access to that SQL database. It's something you own and you manage, and Microsoft doesn't know anything about, right? So they've built the tools to get all that data out through the data management workspace.
Right.
So that's the approach that we've taken because of our transaction volumes and our need to add cubes on top of these things for some of the deployment scenarios. And also right now it's only operations data with Entity Store. Well, we want to be able to support, talent data and CRM data and mash all those things together into a data warehouse. So that's really the strategy we've taken is let's get all the data out using those standard tools, and then we'll just manage it from there.
So does that mean that you're not using the Entity Store at all, or are you only using it for pulling like non-aggregated CPU intensive, compute intensive?
I would say, yeah, I mean, I'm fine using it for smaller things like the fixed asset workspace where there's just not the transaction volume and there's not the need for like real-time reporting.
Okay.
If you need real-time reporting, then you need a strategy to incrementally load these things and have it be up to date, which Microsoft has talked about adding to the Entity Store. But as it sits today, you basically have to reprocess the entire Entity Store, and then, then the new data shows up. So it's not as real time.
I think that's on the roadmap.
It is on. Everything related to this is on the roadmap. So by the time you listen to this in 2 days, it'll all change. But
right. No, I don't think it's going to change.
They say the roadmap is a 6-month window for implementation. So we're looking at least first half of next year, right? Could that be on the spring release next year? Maybe that is. This is a platform thing, right? So,
it's not right. It's not my thing to promise, and it's, no,
it's their promise. They said it's Microsoft.
But people are building reporting right now. They want to build reporting for their operations. Either they're already in production or they have a go live. And because just to reiterate some of the things that Joel says, so the Entity Store, you would go into operations and you will set up a schedule, a batch job that populates your Entity Store, and then that as far as I know, there's a change tracking involved there, so it will do an incremental update of the entity store? No,
that's
full.
what's on the roadmap. So now it's just full.
Right. So that means don't use it if you have a lot of data. That's what you said. If there's a lot of transactions.
Yeah, I don't think if you have, millions and tens of millions of transactions, doing full loads into a data warehouse is not a good strategy.
But so then you said bring your own database, BYOD. If you start from scratch today and you go into your Azure subscription and you create yourself a SQL database, Azure SQL, and it's an empty database, and then you take that connection string and you bring it into your operations instance and you connect it so that you can use the data management functionality to populate that database with data, basically using the data entities. There's still no change tracking there, so you will still have the same experience, basically.
There's version 1 change tracking, I would call it. So it is there. You can try it out. We've ran into some issues. That's why I call it version 1. I mean, it's not fully baked yet, but it is there now. And they just added delete support in platform 11. So it includes creations, modifications, and deletions.
Okay. But the performance, wouldn't that still be the same? Regardless if you push it to your own database or the entity store? But both are hosted in Azure, SQL Azure.
In theory, yes. Yeah. From a technology perspective, I can't answer that, but today the entity store, it's not so much the performance of pushing the data. I mean, that is part of it. That doesn't exist today. But even if the entity store and bring your own database had the incrementals, right now we would still go with bring your own database because the volumes are so high and direct query isn't performing well enough with high volumes. We need a cube sitting on top of it so that the users just get faster results when it's querying millions of records. We've seen some of the SQL that Power BI writes for the direct query. It's not pretty.
You have to make that is important because when you model your query, you have to make sure that you're sequencing it right to optimize the query. Right.
But you're not doing it like the user. If they use a contains in Power BI, it writes some of the ugliest SQL you've ever seen for a contains statement to the SQL server, and it just takes forever. Versus if you do a begins with, it writes what you would normally write as a SQL developer. So there's some things with direct query. So today I would recommend bring your own database, and then either a cube on top of that, bring your own database, or use Power BI import, right? Because Power BI import does let you import, again, it's depending on transaction volume. But if you're like in the millions of records, you can import that into Power BI, and then essentially it's creating a poor man's cube in the background. When you do the import.
Well, that's true. I mean, always Power BI has to have native support for connecting Azure SQL directly. Yep. Okay, cool.
But then once you're in PowerBI.com, you're right. You've got all the license implications. You're paying for those PowerBI.com license, but you can also put them in teams and put them in a bunch of places. So.
And you can pull data from it into your flow, maybe.
Yes.
If you make triggers.
Embedded, that's true. Yeah, you can have the trigger functionality for KPI triggers, and I'm trying to remember what is in there for flow because you keep asking me about Power BI and flow. I can't remember what it does. Well, it wasn't terribly exciting, is all I remember.
All of these are, at least they are capable of talking to similar data feeds, but we're missing logic BI, and because you have logic apps, we have Power Apps, we have Power BI, but we were missing logic BI.
So Power BI has one trigger, and the trigger is when a data-driven alert is triggered. So you actually have to set up the alert in Power BI, And then when that thing happens, then you can do something with it in Flow. Because I think natively Power BI just sends you an email and says, we're in trouble. But you can, post it to Yammer or whatever then.
Do you have any things you played with on CDS that connects to either CRM or operations?
I really haven't got into CDS. I'm in a wait and see mode on it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just gonna continue to evolve, and and I've seen some stuff from other MVPs like Kurt, not to call him out, but I saw some stuff on Twitter that he was posting and saying, I don't know if it's fully baked, and I'll, kind of take his word for it. So that's where I've been on CDS, is kind of a wait and see.
Let's bring him on, Fredrik, on a show. I think that would be a good idea. Let's out him. Let's see what he has done on CDS.
He is in
and
our
by
chat,
the time,
so
yeah, I know.
I think I saw him in the
but
chat.
It's okay. I see the chat.
So
sorry.
I just want to tie off the BI. I mean, I know it seems confusing because there's way too many options, but I think you can simplify it by saying PowerBI.com works with bring your own database and data entities. And then if you want to go to the next level and do embedded, to me, that's kind of the next level, right? Get all your reporting figured out, get the data out, let yourself analyze it. Then you can kind of turn that into a development task to say, okay, now I want this baked into the application. That's how I would take it on, not the reverse way. I wouldn't, it's very hard to do BI reporting without being able to actually see the data, right? Like that's what you're stuck with in the entity store. I'm in production, something is happening, and if it doesn't go right, I can't write a SQL command to figure out what went wrong. So it's just, it's harder that way, and the development experience is harder. So if you're trying to get into this stuff, starting from the embedded experience, I think you're kind of starting at the 401 level of BI instead of the 101 level, which is give me my data and let me figure it out.
So how do you do implementations in projects that you are on? Where do you start, and how do you go forward in creating sort of like a reporting solution?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned at the top that I'm a product manager, and part of our product is a BI model for the project module, because that's what we're focused on. So we have, I think a dozen fact tables and 25 dimensions, we've figured out all the hard problems with the project module. And so we can just go to a customer and say, here you go. Here's all the project module. It's all tied together the way it needs to be. And so we have a starting place. So if you don't have that, unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have a lot of BI, ready data entities. And so it really is a development task to get started to, figure out your transaction tables that you want to bring out and build data entities around them.
Yeah, but if you're doing an implementation, do you wait until, because the customer will probably have some initial requirements, right? We need these and that type of information. But if you're not sure how the data entities is working, you have to create a lot of data to present some type of report that you want to present. Do you initially start out with those reports, or is this something that you probably delay to a later phase when you get data in there?
Yeah, it depends on the customer. I mean, in general, we want to have BI be part of the implementation and part of it be after the implementation, right? So there's obviously always some go live critical reporting that you have to figure out. And one of the hard things about Power BI is not everybody's ready to go from their crazy Excel spreadsheets and SSRS reports to Power BI. That's not always a leap that everyone can make. So you kind of have to find out where the customer's at and, bring some of this tooling along. So, that's why one of the things that's nice about the cube is if you get all this data into a cube, then you can basically consume it with whatever tool you're comfortable with. So Excel, Power BI, You can throw up an SSS server and deploy that against it. You can use a third-party tool like Atlas against a cube. You could go buy some fancy reporting tool. So there's unlimited things once you get to the cube phase of the implementation.
But isn't that a long way if you don't have it product ready?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I mean, I don't know if there's other like ISVs who are bringing some of these data entities to the table. I think a lot of partners are basically building similar to what we've done. They're building the data entities in the area that they have familiarity with, so they can not have to start from scratch.
But I'm curious, because with the cube you're referring to, did you utilize any of the technology within the AOT for this? Did you create perspectives in the AOT for this? Are you using that at all?
We have it because you need it for the entity store, but it really doesn't help you create a tabular cube once you get to BYODB.
Okay.
The main thing that one of the tips I will give on this, a free tip. So when you build your data entities, one of the things we do is make sure we build all the relationships into the data entities. So we'll have like primary and foreign keys, so that when I go to bring your own database, I just do simple joins, because as you know, the joins and operations can be very complex with, like joining customers is a join between partition and customer ID and data area ID, right? So we'll concatenate all those together so that when we go to join against a customer, we have a unique key that we can use to put the data model back together. And we also do that because Power BI only allows you to join one field to another field. You can't actually do like a data area and customer ID join in Power BI. So you have to do this.
Pretty high up on the list of requests. They haven't gotten there yet. I think that is something to do with the performance, right? Because it's running locally.
Yeah. So we've just go ahead, Tommy.
No, I was just thinking that it reminds me also about the thing that was said about CRM, is that they don't typically have this account num. The IDs, the unique IDs, they are surrogate keys hidden underneath. They're GUIDs basically.
Yep.
But we have those in operations. So that goes back to the integration story about integration of these two systems. But you said something about IDs and it sprung my mind. So go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. That's the pro tip. So create those keys in your data model so that you should just be able to do a simple join once you get it out of the system.
So BYOD, what type of databases can you bring in? Like, do you do that from previous AX databases? Would probably be an easier fit, but how do you do conversions?
No, it's just a blank data. Oh, you mean now you're getting into data warehousing strategies. I mean, bring your own database is essentially just a blank database. And then, AX our operations takes care of publishing all of the tables to that database and then publishing the data inside of those tables. So there's one other pro tip. There's a Azure SQL database called it's called an RS database, and it's much cheaper. It doesn't have it's a SQL database without guaranteed uptime, right? Like it's 99.9% instead of 100%.
Okay.
So for the 0.1%, you can pay 25% of the cost.
Yeah.
So that's one other thing we do. I mean, it's like, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's $400 a month versus $1,500 a month. It's a huge difference for running those. So definitely, no, it's a PS, not an RS, PSR1 or something like that. It's a solid state storage SQL database that you can deploy on Azure. But it doesn't have guaranteed uptime, which you don't need for a reporting server. I mean, 99.9% is probably good enough.
Yeah.
Right. So the downtime is then tied up to maintenance windows. Okay, I'm just asking.
Yeah, or you know how Azure is. I mean, I don't think it's ever supposed to be down technically, but they're just not guaranteeing. I'm sure they're doing some kind of, with the SQL server, it's in 2 different buildings with 2 different internet connections, yada, 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 to make sure that it can never go down. So I'm sure there's a huge infrastructure difference, but I don't know. Lightning strikes, your Azure farm goes down, and your SQL server goes down for 5 minutes is what I assume happens.
Yeah. Something is taking care of it. Someone is taking care of it.
The maintenance guy just like flips off the light switch because he's not paying attention when he goes home.
It was the wrong switch. It was the main power switch, the big one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Restarts the coffee machine.
Yeah. Normally the light switch has some tape on it that says don't turn off, but when somebody does it in the Azure, the whole thing just...
Well, that's brilliant. So there was one question. It's not related to Power BI or Flow or any of the topics, but Kurt wants us to just mention that Microsoft is leaning towards managing our dev and stage environments more aggressively, if you'd like. So with I think it was just late September, anyone who was accessing their operations environments through LCS, they will notice that if they try to access the VMs, they will get a pop-up saying that they would need to add their IP address to a whitelist. So there was like an RDP lockdown thing going on, and it was announced that they would start locking down in the 5th of October. And I wanted to bring, Jim for SAGlobal. I've seen his name around, and I wanted to bring him on the podcast to talk about that, because I think maybe perhaps he would love to talk about that, or maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll make the introduction.
Because he was one that had so many IPs to put into that list, and the tooling was not perfect. Yeah. But they seem to push that further, because or maybe they introduced it region by region, because even after the 5th of October I can still access the VMs without having to add IPs to the whitelist. But I have been starting to do that now, because I've seen it take effect. You can no longer access the VMs managed by Microsoft unless you add the IP to a whitelist. So that typically has to be some sort of either the IP of your office, or so you can have multiple colleagues coming out on the internet through the same IP or external IP. You can just Google what's my IP, there are multiple sites that can show your external IP, and that has to be added to the whitelist. Typically that's a bad thing for companies that has tons of users sitting at home with their own subscription, and they might get a new IP every month or something like that. And people who are traveling, airports, hotels, adding all of those IPs is not manageable at all. And then to add to the mix, they are going to prevent us from having local admin access to the VMs. That means that we're on any VM hosted by Microsoft. We will get limited access to local admin operations, basically, on the VMs. So that means the Tier 2 and Tier 1 boxes hosted by Microsoft. Then we can download the VMs and host them ourselves, so we can put them in our own cloud subscription, and then we get full access. But the VMs hosted by Microsoft, not so much. So the message to anyone's listening to this is that you need to go on to IDs.com and make sure to put in IDs for any tooling that you can think of that you need to have without having local admin access. And one thing I want to see is that I could basically take a copy of, for instance, the Azure SQL database, the one that you have with your Tier 2 environments, to get a copy of that to either my own Azure subscription or something like that, so I could basically take a closer look into that with whatever tooling I have, given that I don't have access to the database also by Microsoft. But there are probably a long list of other things that people can think of that they would like to have if they no longer have access to the VMs. Otherwise, we're going to be downloading VHDs or putting our Tier 1 sandboxes on our own cloud subscriptions.
Yeah, I mean, many times you install the Power BI gateway and the Power BI desktop. Those are two low-hanging fruit for things that don't come natively with a Tier 1 box that you need to have.
Right.
Or there needs to be a process to not have those things. But the gateway, there's no other way without the gateway to do it on a Tier 1 box. So I'm with you.
That's true. You can, so any Tier 2 environment, the Azure SQL database can only be accessed through that single BI VM. There's IP restriction there. So, and obviously it's a server, so there can only be 2 guys logged on at the same time on that VM. But then again, you only have one user. That's the admin user. So if you want to download and export that database, you have to log on to that server to access the Azure SQL. But at the same time, Joel is in there creating his Power BI reports at the same time. So you have to kick him out. Yeah. So we need more tooling. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a couple of big things like Management Reporter and SSRS that they need to have a cloud solution for. Then I think it's just details to get everything else moved over. But you don't need a box anymore. I mean, you shouldn't need a box anymore for this kind of stuff, right? It should just all be hosted services, or a local box is fine if that's what you for development or whatever. Even for development, why do you need a box? Just give me Visual Studio on my computer and let me compile the code and load it up to the service and see what the end result is.
Imagine if we had that.
Why do you think they're doing this? Is there a reason? Is there positive, not except all the negatives that you mentioned?
I think the reason is there's a security issue.
That too.
So I don't think there's any choice in it.
imagine that you're the IT admin. And this is a weak argument, I know, but I imagine that you're the IT admin and you have some servers. You're responsible for these servers, and then you're gonna grant this admin user with full access to that VM for unknown people. Well, unknown quotes. It's fairly difficult to have that responsibility by then. So it's a compliance thing, and if Microsoft is going to be responsible for these VMs, then they lock them down. But then again, we're moving towards a SaaS world, that operations is going to be SaaS. It's not going to be dependent on these VMs, and we need to access these VMs. But we're in between two worlds, 2 realms basically, and I think either there's going to be a huge pushback on this lack of local admin access, or we need some intermediate solution for this, or we need more tooling to get around this. So get those ideas up there.
Yeah.
And the feedback.
Has anybody put that in? Somebody has to kind of upvote them. So we should make a pact that everybody, if somebody writes something in there, if we do something during this podcast, everybody who listens to it should have to go in and upvote it.
Yeah, put the link in the show notes, Tommy, so we can upvote it.
Tommy's gonna register this afterwards, and then we're gonna put it in the show notes, so you can go upvote Tommy's request for. Is it more tooling that you want, or do you want more access?
Well, any suggestion has to be a concrete one, and some of the suggestions are probably going to be more abstract, and people will downvote it. But because you can comment on the ideas. So
I'm pretty sure you're not getting more access. So it's just figuring out the problems that we're going to run into. From what I've heard, there's a security issue with the admin access, and it's not coming back. Right.
Yeah. So today I was trying to import. I was trying to import one of these GER formats into an instance, and the entire environment just stalled on me. And I logged on to the backend VM, and so the CPU was 70% plus. It was really struggling, the worker process, the IIS worker process, and memory was up to 10 gigabytes for that single application pool, and that didn't seem natural. And basically, at the end, I couldn't wait on it, so I had to run an IIS reset. You can't do that without local admin, as far as I know. So, what are you going to do when that happens and you can't do it? What are you going to do? You're going to open a support ticket. So, yeah.
I would recommend calling Joris. Should we give out his number?
Yeah, should we? No, maybe not. He won't like that. But he definitely want inputs on tooling. That I'm sure of.
Yeah. Joris is a former MVP, now Microsoft employee, for those listening. So,
yeah,
give him a hard time.
Yeah. So I hope, Kurt, you're happy about that comment on managed development and staging environments. I think that sums it. So is there anything else we should bring on this show, Fredrik and Joel? Or should we call this a wrap?
I think we've dove into Flow and got an introduction into it, I think. And Power BI is also a small update on what's been talked about earlier. And now you had a big rant on Access. Access so I think we'll call this a day. We're closing in on 2 hours, so people probably have to go back to work or to sleep all around the world. Thank you so much for joining again, Joel. It's been a pleasure. You were so knowledgeable, and working these specific topics are something that is really popular. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. Yeah. Anytime.
And you can find Joel's stuff he's at Joe Leichty on Twitter, and now you can go to joeleichty.com to find out his blog, which I definitely I'm going to work a flow every time you post something. Post that on every Yammer group that I'm subscribed to. So thank you so much. And you can find Tommy's. You can introduce yourself, Tommy. You do that best.
Hi, I'm Tommy. I'm a Microsoft MVP on AX. So yet another AX.com, and Skaue is my Twitter handle. But I want Joel to run his memory trick for his last name one more time, because I didn't quite catch it.
Okay. Lazy Eagle is catching his tan yak.
Lazy Eagle is catching his tan yak. What is that? What is a tan yak? What is that? What's that mean?
I have no idea. A yak is an animal.
Yak is
oh, okay.
A yak.
I don't know why. Ox. I don't know why a lazy eagle would go hunting a giant animal. I have no idea. You have to ask my parents. We should have my parents on the show next time, and we can find out why they came up with that.
So yaks are these big kind of cows equivalent, old school cows, basically, and an eagle chasing a yak is. I gotta make a small GIF for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Joel. You can find my stuff at dyntips.com. So Dyntips, and I'm on AX Fredrik. For those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, Tommy is shaking his head, and I'm not going to change it, not yet. It has to do legacy. It's sort of retro. It's getting into being retro. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have any type of input, go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel and talk to us there. We trying to do this live when we have the possibility. So go subscribe to our YouTube channel, and every time press that bell. If you're on our YouTube channel, go press that bell. If you don't know where that is, I will show you now, because that's really important. So if we're doing a live broadcast, you can go in, and so on the channel there is a bell that's up here somewhere on next to the subscribe button. So you click that bell and you will be subscribed to our YouTube channel, and if we go live, you'll know when we are on live, and you get a small pop. If you're using Chrome, you'll even get a pop-up in your Windows desktop. So go subscribe and add that bell. Thank you so much, and we're signing off. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.